the disappearing influenza. What happened to the flu? Every year at this time of year, we're talking about how bad the flu season is or if it's a mild flu season. 1 year ago, this heat map shows December 21st, 2019, the severity of the seasonal flu in the United States. Red and purple states are the worst. The green and yellow are the best. Okay, so last year, the final weeks of December 2019, Texas, Tennessee, Georgia, having the worst time of it as far as the seasonal flu. Where are we in the final week of 2020? All green. The flu has disappeared. Some places around the world literally reporting a drop of 98%. 98% in cases of the seasonal flu. This makes no sense whatsoever. Unless COVID is just the flu in disguise. Seem to be indicated by this chart here. Do you detect a pattern? Leads us to topic number 2. They don't want us to go back to normal. The globalist opinion of this was expressed last March in an op-ed piece by Gordon Litchfield, who's the editor-in-chief of MIT's Technology Review. He wrote, and I quote, "Ultimately, I predict that we'll restore the ability to socialize safely by developing more sophisticated ways to identify who is a disease risk and who isn't, and discriminating legally against those who are," end quote. This is essentially what the New York Assembly is getting ready to do. Make it legal to identify who might be a risk and then discriminating against them, which means forcibly detaining, treating, and vaccinating them. He's talking about, to do this, establishing a total surveillance state. The ability to track your every movement, your compliance with government rules and regulations, who you associate with, whether you've been vaccinated, whether they've been vaccinated, and whether you're saying bad things about your government overlords. This is the so-called Great Reset that we've been talking about, the fourth industrial revolution that's being promoted by the World Economic Forum, getting set to announce this officially in just a couple of weeks. This was launched back in 2014 when these terms, the Great Reset, the fourth industrial revolution, were first pushed into the mainstream economic press. The ideas of a cashless society, the sharing economy. Hey, by 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Someone's going to own that stuff. Just not you and me. Biometric mass surveillance, social credit scores, etc. This has been the dream of the technocratic global elite for decades. The coronavirus is just a useful excuse to get them to push the idea on the rest of us. Britain, heads up, your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, just tweeted out coded support for the World Economic Forum. Over the weekend, he incorporated the phrase, "Build Back Better," into a tweeted message. Build Back Better, as you know by now, not only the campaign slogan for Joe Biden, it's the slogan of the World Economic Forum and its Great Reset. They are the promoters of this diabolical restructuring of global civilization. Another example of the future that they envision for you and me, tiny houses. Tiny houses. Because once we get past the virus, then climate change will be the global scarecrow to frighten us all into submission. And tiny houses, these little 200 square foot homes, they've got such a tiny little carbon footprint. That's what they're envisioning for all of us. Me, I'll take this seriously when I see Al Gore move into something like that. Coming up, degendering Congress. That's next on 5 and 10.
So when these four extremely powerful and influential bodies line up to tell us what they are planning for our economic future, it's worth maybe just paying a little attention. The World Economic Forum meets every January in Davos. You will have heard of the expression Davos man, Jackie. It refers to all the zillionaires and pop stars and popes and princes and politicians who meet every year to map out our futures. I'm sure you've heard of Bono, Jackie. Well, next year's World Economic Forum at Davos has been pushed back to May in Lucerne, presumably because of COVID. But, and here's where you really need to pay attention, Jackie, this year's Davos is very, very different to all the previous ones. The World Economic Forum, along with the United Nations, along with the International Monetary Fund, and along with any number of prominent globalist organizations and powerful individuals, including Prince Charles, together have jointly promised that the 2021 World Economic Forum will be used to introduce via a vast network of connected big tech corporations, online activist movements, and compliant local and national governments something they call the Great Reset. This isn't some Sky After Dark fantasy conspiracy theory, Jackie. It is a global commitment they have made to use the panic and fear generated by the coronavirus as a means to reshape all our economies and laws and move to a new form of capitalism that focuses on net zero emissions. To use all the tools of COVID to tackle climate change. You might think this is a great thing. You might think this is a terrible thing. But what is unforgivable, Ms. Lambie, is for you not to think about it at all. If implemented successfully, the Great Reset will undeniably and deliberately have extreme and possibly dire repercussions for every single one of your constituents. Ignorance, Senator, is no excuse. Already, the Great Reset is being widely advertised on posters and in ads across the UK and Europe, and no doubt will be here before too long. "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy" is just one of their marketing slogans. I'm sure there are plenty of Tasmanians, Jackie, who might beg to differ with that proposition. So let me fill in the blanks for you, Jackie. The plan involves replacing shareholders of big companies with stakeholders who happen to be left-wing bureaucrats and climate change zealots. Replacing mum and dad small businesses and private enterprises with big tech and big business. Mrs. Kafup's share portfolio is out. Greta Thunberg's zero emissions are in. Democracy and free enterprise go out the window. Totalitarian government control slides in through the back door. But remember, it's not only a great reset, it's a great deception. Because in order to get everyday people like you and me, Jackie, to surrender many of the rights and freedoms we currently take for granted, the repeatedly stated aim of these organisations is to deliberately use COVID as an excuse, to use all the political and authoritarian tools, as Prince Charles puts it, that are currently being used around the world to eradicate the virus, such as lockdowns, exclusion zones, forced closure of businesses, heavy fines, making protesting illegal, and so on, but now to eradicate carbon emissions. Those behind this scheme are adamant that there can be and never will be a return to normal, that life will never again be what it was prior to COVID. That is why they constantly talk about the new normal. But remember, Jackie, this is not me saying this, lurking in the darkest corners of Sky News After Dark. This is them saying it, the people with the power and the means and the obsessional desire to do it. And they keep telling us again and again precisely what they have in store.
Now is a historical moment, a time, not only to fight the real virus, but to shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
And if it's still not clear, Jackie, maybe Santa could pop this little gem into your Christmas stocking. The book written by World Economic Forum boss Klaus Schwab himself, setting out precisely how the most powerful forces in the world are lining up to use the COVID-19 crisis as a pretext for introducing a new climate change-focused one world economy that will strip away property rights and basic democratic rights. They are not hiding this stuff, Jackie. They are shouting it from the rooftops. Even more reason why your ignorance is inexcusable. Indeed, here's Prince Charles only a couple of days ago wearing a poppy and disgracefully using the symbolism of Remembrance Day to push this same eco-fascist, globalist, totalitarian agenda.
With the urgency required, I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you will join me to drive a new Marshall-like plan for nature, people and planet, led by the private sector, to align our collective efforts and resources for the highest possible impact. We need a shift in our economic model that places nature and the world's transition to net zero at the heart of how we operate, prioritizing the pursuit of sustainable, inclusive growth in the decades to come. There is hope that we can transform the situation, but I'm afraid we are literally at the last hour, and there is real urgency for action.
Literally at the last hour, a bit of hyperbole. On a side issue, Prince Charles is now acting in a flagrantly political manner, aligning himself with the global political and business agenda reeking of oligarchies and fascism. This makes Prince Charles clearly unfit for the role of monarch of Britain or Australia, and the Queen must remove him now from the line of succession. This has gone far beyond a joke, and Prince Charles is now no better than the repellent Extinction Rebellion activists who likewise desecrated Remembrance Day by using it for their own shoddy global warming activism. But back to the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum boasts on its website that the only acceptable response to the COVID crisis is to pursue a great reset of our economies, our politics, and our societies. Nothing ambiguous about that, Jackie. And so I say, well done to One Nation's Senators Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts for being concerned enough to raise this issue in our federal parliament where it should be raised and where it should be debated. Last week, Senator Hanson put forward a motion for the Australian Parliament to reject the Great Reset. Pretty simple, nothing to lose there. Just simply say, thanks Klaus, but nein danke, it's not for us, and we won't be sending anyone to this year's World Economic Forum. Danke schön. Win-win. Josh, you'll save a fortune in airfares and luxury accommodation all at the same time. Yet, despite the abhorrence of the Great Reset agenda, every single member of Parliament, federal Parliament, from the Liberals to the Nationals to the Greens, voted against Pauline's proposal. Shame on every single parliamentarian, from the Prime Minister to Jackie Lambie, for either being too lazy or too ignorant to understand this proposed assault on our democratic way of life, or worse, for giving it the nod. Shame on you all. You are unworthy of the trust put in you by the freedom-loving people of this country.
Speaking of socialist utopias, it looks like Pope Francis has now signed on to the Great Reset. Chief executive officers of some major Fortune 500 corporations like Bank of America, British Petroleum, Johnson & Johnson, Salesforce, Merck, and others are joining the Council for Inclusive Capitalism with the Vatican. This is a new business organization affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church under the moral guidance of Pope Francis. The council says its goal is to build a fairer, more inclusive, and sustainable economic foundation for the world. Described as an effort by big business to partner with the Vatican in rethinking capitalism and its effect on stakeholders, not just shareholders. That's the key word there, stakeholder capitalism. This is a buzz phrase that is gaining in popularity. In fact, it was taken from the Davos Manifesto 2020, authored by the World Economic Forum, the group that is pushing the Great Reset. Ostensibly, stakeholders in stakeholder capitalism are customers, suppliers, employees, shareholders, and local communities. Under this system, a company's goal is not just to maximize value for shareholders, but to create long-term value for its stakeholders. Now, that sounds great in principle, corporations have unquestionably at times done very horrible things to the local communities in which they're located in the pursuit of short-term profits. But how do you define stakeholders? That's the key question. Climate change is a major concern of the controlling government body. If climate change is a concern of the controlling government body, do you, and by the way, which it is for Pope Francis and for the World Economic Forum, they've admitted, CEO founder Klaus Schwab has admitted that once the COVID crisis is passed, climate change will become the crisis needed to drive forward the Great Reset agenda. If, in fact, that becomes a criterion for determining stakeholders, does every major corporation need to have a representative from Mother Earth sitting on the board of directors? Because after all, we're all affected by climate, right? Which means that we are all stakeholders in, well, everything. If you think I'm exaggerating about the implications of this, just go back to July. You might have missed this, as I did. Joe Biden unveils his economic plan, calls for an end to shareholder capitalism in favor of stakeholder capitalism. Why? Because it's all about building back better. The phrase lifted directly from the World Economic Forum and now adopted by, you guessed it, Pope Francis, right there in his latest encyclical, Building Back Better. 2021 is going to be really interesting.